Let's chew this over with our panel. Dan Hoffman, Mark Thiessen, and Kim Strassel are all here. And Dan, we haven't had you on the program yet, so let's go to you first. You didn't sound particularly optimistic this morning that the talks today would bear fruit. What are you thinking now?
Well, I would echo what General Keane said about Vladimir Putin having thus far at least shown absolutely no interest, and there's just no evidence that he wants a peace deal. And even if there are negotiations that take place, the concern that I would have is that these sorts of deals are ephemeral. Russia, the United States, signed the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, and when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 and illegally annexed Crimea, Boris Yeltsin was dead, and of course Bill Clinton was no longer in office. However, if land were to pass from Ukraine to Russia, especially in the Donbass, which you have outlined so exquisitely well, the risks that Ukraine would run by giving up heavily fortified structures there, economically with those rare earth minerals, Russia will take advantage of that, and they'll be prepared to launch further attacks. Martha MacCallum said it best. Vladimir Putin has never veered from his strategic objective to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine and install a Kremlin puppet regime.
Mark, everybody's been asking the last couple of days why the Europeans are all there today, along with Zelensky, to meet with President Trump. To believe what it sounded like Jackie's sources were saying about this is everybody, according to them, sort of realizes that land concessions are going to have to be made. Zelensky knows this. He knows he's going to have to go home and sort of sell whatever he agrees to eventually to Ukrainians. And so the Europeans are essentially there today to bolster whatever concessions he ultimately has to make to give them credibility so that the Ukrainian people don't lose faith in his leadership. What do you think about that?
Well, they're also there to help frame and shape the security guarantees and to offer up their participation in those. If they are going to offer an Article 5 style guarantee, it's not just going to be the United States that does that. It's going to be France. It's going to be Germany. It's going to be Italy. It's going to be Finland. It's going to be all these countries that are all going to offer individual Article 5 style guarantees to protect Ukraine. And just to pull up to 30,000 feet for a second, if you think about this, before the invasion in 2022, Vladimir Putin already held 7% of Ukraine. He now holds 19%. He's gained over 3 years. He's gained about 12. If they give 1% of the more in Donbass, 13% of Ukraine, at a cost of 1 million casualties and $500 billion in spending. If this war ends with a peace deal in which Ukraine still has 80% of its territory and an Article 5 commitment from the United States and European allies to protect it, that is a huge victory for Ukraine. It means they survive as an independent sovereign nation with protections in place to prevent Vladimir Putin from starting the war again. Now,
yes, but only, Mark, if
agreement,
Russia doesn't invade once again, right? If the peace deal.
Well, that's what the security guarantees are about. So that's what the security guarantees are about. That's why everything depends on what they negotiate right now. And if they do negotiate robust security guarantees and then Vladimir Putin rejects that, then one, he's the one saying no to peace, which means the hammer comes down on him both economically and in terms of weapons to Ukraine. And B, he's going to suffer terribly as a result of that. And two, he gives away the game, which is that he doesn't plan to stop. So President Trump just said, I'm not looking for a deal that stops the war for 2 years. I'm looking for a deal that ends the war permanently. And that involves very serious security guarantees and also border barriers. You know, Poland is building this East Front border barrier across its entire frontier with Poland and Belarus. It involves tank traps, it involves minefields, it involves razor wire, it involves it's a very, very complex barrier. You could build that across the entire barrier between Russia and Ukraine. Nobody loves walls more than Donald Trump. I could see that being a part of this deal as well.
All right, Kim Strassel, let's talk about selling this deal. First of all, they've got to come up with some sort of agreement between Zelensky and the European leaders and President Trump. Then they've got to sell it to Putin. But then they've also got to sell it to the Ukrainian people. We should point out that about 2/3 of the Ukrainian people say it's time to end the war. But at the same time, 78% of the Ukrainian people, according to one poll that I saw, say we're not giving Russia territory that it doesn't already occupy. to get a deal. So how do you sell this to the Ukrainian people?
Yeah, I mean, there was a recent poll done by a European Policy Institute that said that while, I mean, a lot of general polls will say that, yes, Ukrainians would like to see an end to the war and they're okay with a negotiated settlement. But when you really dig into the details, if that is about giving up certain strategic areas, giving up significant portions of Ukraine, then the political opinion on that sours very quickly. Another interesting aspect of this is, if you have these land swaps, also, what is Ukraine required to publicly recognize as Russian? Or rather, can it simply say Russia gets this, but it is disputed territory in effect in our minds, and something that one day down the road potentially Ukraine could still have a claim to? So a lot of this is about how this is framed. I would also note, I mean, that Putin has to sell this too, and we don't think about that. But if you are trying to get him to willingly agree to do something, he has to go back and say, I got a win out of this. Because his only interest is in holding on to power. Russia has invested enormous amounts of resources and lives to this cause, and it's soured the Russian public on it to a certain degree. So they have to feel as though there was something in this. Otherwise, it was just a venture where Putin lost a lot of money and treasure. And so he needs to probably come back and say that he got some land out of it. But again, it is all going to come down, I think, a lot to definitions. Similarly, Donald Trump, we were just talking about foreign troops on soil. If there are Article 5-like security agreements, there will be foreign troops on Ukrainian soil if they have any meaning. Could those include Americans? Undoubtedly, he would like the Europeans to take the lead there, and that's probably why they are at these events, this event today, to talk about how they would be the forward movement of that. But if Americans are there too, I think Donald Trump needs to make clear, as Martha was saying, that this is more in the line not of a forever war, but of a peacekeeping group that is there to ensure there isn't another one.
All right. Well, we'll see what comes of the meeting this afternoon. Still a lot to go. Ladies, gentlemen, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it. Now this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Will Kane. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Kane podcast for full episodes right now.